Hello, Rama Pupodu. Hope all are in good health. Feeling great, wonderful, having a happy and peaceful life. Now let's continue with Muruganar. Vishwanatha, what is the use of repeating his name so many times? Why don't you compose a verse with those two words? Obeying Bhagavan's command, Vishwanatha Swami took a piece of paper and tried to compose a verse with those two words. But however much he tried, he could not write more than those two words. After several unsuccessful attempts, he finally gave up. He placed the sheet of paper with those words before Bhagavan and left the hall. When he returned, he found that Bhagavan had completed the whole verse and had written Vishwanathan under it, even though he had contributed almost nothing to it. Bhagavan wrote the verse as though it was Muruganar speaking. Arunachala Ramanan, the one who resides in the heart lotus of all, smiled at my ego and destroyed it completely with a single glance of grace. He thus showered his blessings on me. Mugavapuri Murugan, to enable me to enlighten the entire world with my work, Ramana Sannidhi Murai, which is comparable and equal to Tiruvachakam. This verse is very important because it was written by Bhagavan himself. Unasked, Sri Bhagavan has declared in this verse and revealed that his real name was, is, and will ever be Arunachala Ramanan. Then Bhagavan assures us that he ever resides in and as each one of us equally in the heart. His glance of grace, even from his picture, has the power to dissolve the ego idea. Bhagavan goes on to reveal that the sole function of his advent in our midst is to re-establish enlightenment throughout humanity and not just on chosen disciples. This verse is proof of this and therefore very important. Muruganar, in his very first encounter with Bhagavan, received his glance of grace and had an ecstatic spiritual experience. However, as sincere seekers, we must bear in mind that this ecstasy takes time to stabilize. When this verse was written, Bhagavan again looked at him. This established him in a state from which poured forth hundreds of verses spontaneously. Muruganar earned to be in that inherent ecstatic state all the time. He prayed silently that in addition to the time he was spending with his master, he would have a personal audience with him so he could be permanently established in divine bliss. However, he did not reveal his innermost longing to anyone, including Bhagavan. But does Bhagavan need to be told? In those days, in the ashram, a group of devotees would go into the forest to pluck leaves from certain trees to make leaf plates. One morning, a group was planning to go to the forest. Bhagavan shot Muruganar a significant look. Muruganar understood its purport and hurriedly followed Bhagavan out of the hall. The group started to follow, but Bhagavan took him so quickly into the woody interiors of the forest that the others were left far behind. Bhagavan sat on a big log and signaled Muruganar to sit beside him. No words were exchanged between them. Bhagavan then looked at him piercingly and established him in a state of inner felicity. When Muruganar opened his eyes, dusk had fallen and he found himself alone. He had been in ecstasy for several hours. From then on, Muruganar remained in that state of inner bliss and quietude. Having egotistically identified myself with the filthy body, I had slipped down into a desolate state. Now, having been awakened by Him who is pure, divine, gracious wisdom, I have attained the supreme life of silent, natural consciousness, and I am ever flourishing as the perfect, pure self. The signs of self experience, which surged forth when the rising ego was destroyed, had filled my heart, having blossomed me as bliss by the light of the fully blossomed glance of His grace. Guru Ramana made me, this fool, flourish and live as the Buddha. From ancient times, sages and saints in all their devotion and wisdom have written thousands of poems extolling gods and goddesses in varied meters and styles in the Tamil language. Perhaps for the first time in Muruganar, we have one single poet who put down 40,000 verses in different meters in caste Tamil, but on one singular matter, Bhagavan Sri Ramana Maharishi. This spiritual wonder is unique to Muruganar. We also respect this poet saint because he elicited the direct teaching from Bhagavan. But for his efforts, we would not have Bhagavan's direct teaching in three remarkable treatises which can easily be considered as modern Upanishads on self inquiry and self realization. These three works are Ulladu Narpadu, its supplement, Anubandham, Upadesa, Undiyar, and lastly a poem on wisdom, Atma Vidya Kirtanam. All three guide us on how to experience the reality of the limitless self. The genesis of these three treatises is very interesting. Before Muruganar came to Bhagavan in 1926, Bhagavan had written many stray verses which had not been collected and preserved. With Muruganar's natural inclination for poetry, he researched Bhagavan's poems and found 21 stray verses. He collected them and found that they were not on a single theme and therefore sat with Bhagavan analyzing those verses. The theme that he chose was reality and how to recognize it. He was intent on this because by living with Bhagavan and leading a life of pure spirituality, he understood the importance of living the truth. He wanted Bhagavan to write about reality and practical ways to actually be one with it. Some verses did not go with the theme, so he omitted them and requested Bhagavan to replace them with fresh verses based on his own experience. This went on for 20 days. In Tamil literature, one form of poetry restricts a single theme to 40 verses. Muruganar encouraged Bhagavan to comply with this norm. Bhagavan himself titled the collection Ulladu Narpadu, Reality in 40 Verses. While editing this work, Muruganar wanted to preserve some verses that had been omitted and requested Bhagavan to write more and made an anthology of another 40 verses called Ulladu Narpadu Anubandham, Supplement to Reality in 40 Verses. On another occasion, Muruganar was in the middle of a spontaneous flow of writing poems on the play of God and goddesses, where each of them were presented as Ramana. On completing 70 verses, he found that he was stuck where Lord Shiva gives spiritual instruction to sages performing penance in the forest. Since he adored Bhagavan as Shiva himself, he pleaded with Bhagavan, "You are Shiva himself. Here I am, stuck and unable to go on. Please give me the next 30 verses as Lord Shiva's teaching to the accomplished sages." In response, Bhagavan wrote Upadesa Undiyar, 30 verses on spiritual instructions, a step by step guide on how to be the truth. Someone once complimented Muruganar on Ramana Sannidhi Murai, saying, "This is the best work you have done, Muruganar." Muruganar, with tears in his eyes, replied, "In India, the Mahabharata is considered as one of the greatest epics because it contains Lord Krishna's direct teaching in the form of the Bhagavad Gita. Similarly, if you people consider Ramana Sannidhi Murai as my best work, it is because Upadesa Undiyar by Bhagavan is embedded in it." A reputed poet who lived 150 years ago had written a few verses saying that the hardest task for man in the world is self realization. Muruganar was very upset with this. It should be the easiest. How can self realization be the most difficult? He reasoned. He began writing in Bhagavan's presence. Self knowledge is the easiest thing there is. However, he could not go further because he did not know how to put it convincingly. He left the sheet of paper on Bhagavan's sofa and walked off. When he came back, Bhagavan had written the Atma Vidya Kirtanam, a few verses on self knowledge, which described Bhagavan's own state of experience and how it is easy for every one of us to attain. Lo, very easy is self knowledgeable. Lo, very easy indeed, even for the most infirm. So real is the self that compared with its gooseberry in one's hand appears a mere illusion. The thought, I am the body, is the thread on which various thoughts are strung together. Diving within, inquiring, who am I and whence am I? All other thoughts vanish, and as I, within the heart cave, the self shines of its own accord. Such self awareness is the only heaven, stillness, and abode of bliss. If we examine Bhagavan's relationship with Muruganar, it will be found that self realization is indeed the easiest to attain. For Muruganar, there was no God except Bhagavan, no path except self inquiry, and no other purpose in life other than abiding in the self, in the silence. The crowning brilliance in his life was not just his books and bringing out the truth from Bhagavan, it was the fact that he actually lived every word that he wrote. Impressed with his poetic skills, he was offered wealth and luxury by kings if he would only grace their courts. But he chose to be a beggar in the streets of Tiruvannamalai and to be in Bhagavan's shadow, only to live the truth. Muruganar lived the teaching every day, every hour, every minute. Since he was with Bhagavan all the time, he earned the nickname Shadow of Bhagavan. The relationship between Muruganar and Bhagavan is the practical demonstration of the Guru Shishya relationship that is extolled in Hindu scriptures. All Hindu texts are written in question and answer format, with the disciple asking the question and the Guru giving the answer, even on ethical issues. We will soon see how beautifully the Guru disciple relationship is brought out in the Hindu culture when we examine the rest of Muruganar's life. Muruganar communicated with Bhagavan all the same. Bhagavan was not a well read person, whereas Muruganar had read Tamil literature extensively. Sometimes, when Bhagavan was alone with him, he would ask Muruganar to give him the essence of a book. One day, Muruganar was in ecstasy and he started sharing with Bhagavan the essence of some great books. Many books were discussed on that day with Bhagavan, who was a good listener. Then he turned to Muruganar and said, ultimately, the essence of all these books is only one truth. There is just one destination, but the routes and road maps are all very different. There are various parts, scriptures, texts, descriptions, examples, and illustrations, but the sole essence is one single truth. Muruganar was so thrilled that he eagerly responded, "Yes, Bhagavan, it is true. Now I feel that reading all those books was a waste of time." Bhagavan hastened to correct him, saying, "You should not look at it that way. It is because we have read all these books that we have understood that their essence is one truth. Had we not read all these books, the mind would have kept tempting us with the thought that there is a new revelation in some other book. Therefore, reading also serves a purpose. It is the same for rituals and pujas." He added, "There are multifarious rituals and pujas, and the function of doing them all is to recognize that there exists only one single simple truth. The rituals and pujas themselves are not that important for self realization." That's all, folks. Let's continue in the next chapter. Thank you. Bye bye. Rama Rama Popoda.